Welcome to Aging with Dignity. I'm your host, Versha. I want to start today by telling you where this episode comes from. It's been pulled together from your emails, your messages, your quiet comments at the end of conversations. The questions that aren't polished. There were several that started with, I don't even know how to ask this. So today I'm going to do something a little different. I'm going to pose those questions the way you've asked them, as caregivers, as adult children, as siblings, as immigrants, as people trying to do the right thing inside systems that are often confusing and slow. And I'm going to answer you the way I would if we were sitting across from each other having a real conversation. So let's begin. This first question comes from what seems to be an exhausted caregiver. I'm caring for my mother who is 82 and living in my home. She is fairly independent, but I see her slowing down, and I'm scared about her falling or leaving the stove on or some other catastrophe when I might not be around. I try to work from home when I can, but this is not always possible. How do I know if I'm doing enough? Because it never feels like it is. I want to slow this one down because the question usually doesn't come from the words or actions, it's coming from a feeling. I remember sitting in a hospital hallway advocating for dad, doing what I thought was everything. I was asking questions, I was following up, I was taking notes, and still at the end of the day going home with this kind of a knot in my stomach thinking, what did I miss? What didn't I do? What didn't I ask? How did I possibly miss tracking that particular a symptom the doctor was asking about, and so on. So when you ask me, am I doing enough? I hear the care under that question. Here's what I want to say to you. Honestly, people who aren't doing enough don't ask this. Caregiving has a way of moving the goalposts. Just when you catch your breath, something changes. A diagnosis, a decline, a new system to navigate. And suddenly what felt like enough last month feels insufficient today. So instead of measuring yourself against a possible standard, try asking a bit of a kinder question. Am I doing the best I can with what I know, what I have, and the energy I have right now? That question actually leaves room for being human. In the second question, an adult child is noticing things that are changing with her father. First, I'm starting to notice little things with my dad. Nothing dramatic, just small moments that are making me pause. I don't want to take over or make him feel like he's losing control, but I also don't want to wait until something goes wrong. How do I know when it's time to step in more? So, this is a difficult place to be as a child in the parent child relationship. I remember being in exactly that place, noticing things that didn't rise to the level of an emergency, but also didn't feel like it was nothing. I remember dad saying he was out driving and couldn't remember where he was going. That was a one off, but it was worrying to both me and dad. The times when mom would forget to take her medication, so dad stepped in to manage her timings. A story that didn't quite track, the loops that set off the same story, but somehow it just didn't resonate properly. There were several times when I thought, oh, that's new. It was hard to step in and advise mom and dad. I guess I was resisting, at least at some conscious level, that I didn't want to become the parent to them. I wanted to respect their independence. I didn't want to take over or make them feel small, but I wanted them to be safe, especially dad, because in our situation, mom had dad to rely on. Dad simply did not have the option of leaning on mom with her growing Alzheimer's. So, how could I help while still preventing and preserving his sense of independence and dignity? Here's what I learned. Stepping in doesn't have to be a dramatic shift. It doesn't have to be an all or nothing. Most of the time, it starts quietly. And it's, of course, easier when you live locally and can, quote unquote, drop in anytime. But you can also do this through phone calls or even video calls, where you can see the subtler changes that happen over time. I found patterns mattered at this stage. If you're noticing the same little thing more than once, confusion, missed steps, things feeling harder than they used to, that's your cue to lean in a bit. Suggest maybe joining your dad for doctor's appointments. That's a great way to lean in. There's a lot of confusion in doctor's offices where time is tight, matters can be serious, and information overload can be daunting. Most would welcome an extra set of eyes and ears, and doctors gives their updates and diagnosis pretty rapidly, so having someone beside you is always helpful. You can ask pertinent questions while keeping your father in the conversation. You can take notes or record on your electronic devices in a way that most of our parents are not comfortable with. This way, you're respecting boundaries, but you're still stepping in early rather than waiting for a crisis. This early support also gives you options, unlike situations in crises. And start to set out a reliance between you and your dad. I'd suggest that if your gut is nudging you, listen to it. Find ways to build the changing dynamics in a way that's easy and gentle for all. Question 3 is from a caregiver who's carrying a heavy burden of guilt. Versha, I've been caring for my husband for the past 7 years. I love him dearly, but he's not an easy patient. And no matter what I do, I feel guilty. If I help more, I feel like I'm losing myself. If I take a break, I feel selfish. And even when things are okay, I feel like I'm doing something wrong. Why does this feel so heavy? Well, the first thing I want to say to you is 7 years is a long time to carry anyone, especially when it's someone you love and it's not a paid role. And loving someone doesn't make that caregiving any easier. I want to push back gently on the idea that this guilt means you're doing something wrong. Often it means you're doing something hard for a long time, probably without enough support. When you help more and feel like you're disappearing, that's not selfishness talking. That's your body telling you, just stretched too thin. By the way, you might ask yourself, who taught me what a good caregiver looks like? Likelihood is we have very few role models for this work, and certainly not under the conditions in which we work today. But if you've had someone in your life, see what you can leverage from that experience into your way of caring. And the guilt, learn from it. Don't be ruled by it. This next question is one I feel many listeners can relate to, being the daughter or son of immigrant parents. This listener writes, my family is Portuguese. Mom now 88, dad now 90. We immigrated here as a young family. In our home growing up, caregiving was never discussed. As the needs started to show up, you just kind of did it. Now I'm dealing with forms, services, and systems my parents don't trust, and I feel like I'm constantly pushing against them. Why does this feel so hard here? Well, I can relate to this, and I think most of us whose parents were first-generation immigrants can do so as well. See, your parents didn't just raise a family here, they built a life here. They lived young, they arrived young, they worked hard, they relied on each other. They learned very early that you survive by keeping your head down and handling things within the family. So, of course, caregiving was never discussed. It didn't need to be, you just did it. That worked when families were young, healthy, and strong, and when systems weren't part of daily life. What makes us feel so hard now isn't that you're doing something wrong. It's that you're trying to care for your parents in a system that wasn't part of their world. To them, the forms feel intrusive. Services feel like a loss of control. My dad felt the services were a charity and refused to leverage them. To you, those same things feel necessary. Sometimes they feel like it's the only way to keep your parents safe. So you're constantly translating, not just language, but values. You're trying to honor their pride, their independence, and their history, while also navigating healthcare, home care, and aging in a country that requires documentation and advocacy. That tension's exhausting. One thing I learned and I wish to share here, using the services does not mean you're abandoning your parents. Asking questions doesn't mean you're disrespecting them. You're not choosing between being a good child and being a good advocate. You're actually doing both at the same time. And bridging the values and traditions of two worlds is not easy. It takes strength that most people never actually see. All right, this fifth question. Oh, this is a sensitive but very polarizing one around shared sibling responsibilities. This question, listener writes, there are 5 of us, 3 brothers and 2 sisters. Everyone loves our parents, but somehow I'm the one keeping every appointment, every call, every crisis. My father has kidney failure, requiring dialysis weekly, and my mother's just been diagnosed with Alzheimer's. I'm exhausted and starting to feel resentful. How did this all land on me? Is there a way I can find balance again? When you say this, I can hear how tired you are, not just physically, but emotionally. Dialysis every week and a new Alzheimer's diagnosis. 2 parents needing very different kinds of care at the same time. That alone is enough to overwhelm one person. Add siblings into the picture, and the weight can feel even heavier. Here's the hard truth I've seen again and again. Caregiving doesn't get divided fairly. It gets divided by proximity, by personality, by who responds first, who has specific skills or nature, and by who can tolerate the system the longest. You didn't necessarily choose this role. You absorbed it. You showed up. You handled things. And once that happens, families often, I'm sure without meaning to, start relying on the person who seems quote unquote capable. That doesn't mean your siblings don't care, but caring and carrying are not the same thing. The resentment you mentioned doesn't mean you're ungrateful or unloving. You've likely just been holding more than your share for too long, quietly. Finding balance again doesn't start with asking for more help. That's too vague, and it often leads to disappointment. It starts with naming the reality. You might say something like, I can't continue at this pace. I need us to rethink how this is shared. Then get specific. Maybe one sibling manages dialysis scheduling, one handles the paperwork or finances. Maybe one becomes the person to do the regular check in for your mom. Caregiving doesn't need equal effort, but the shared responsibility will go a long way. And if some of your siblings still can't or won't step in the way you need, then part of finding balance may mean adjusting your own expectations and seeking support outside the family. That's not giving up, that's protecting yourself. By the way, I heard the line recently, you can't pour from an empty cup. And it's true. You don't need to sacrifice your health, your relationships, or your sense of self to prove your love. Oh, this next one gets to the heart of why I started Aging with Dignity to help families embrace having some of these hard conversations. So the question begins. My family avoids hard conversations. Every time I bring up planning, finances, or what my parents would want, the conversation shuts down. I don't want to cause conflict, but doing nothing feels irresponsible. How do I even start? Interesting. You know, some families don't argue, they just avoid. And avoidance can feel polite until caregiving enters that picture. I've seen adult children who gather the courage to raise planning questions only to have that door shut immediately. We don't need to talk about that. Don't worry about it. Or everything's fine. When that happens, it can make you feel like you're the problem. You're not. Families that avoid the hard conversations usually aren't being careless. They're protecting themselves the only way they know how, by not looking too closely. Here are three suggestions you might want to keep in mind when trying to have these conversations. Number one, perhaps try changing the entry point into the conversation. So instead of starting with, hey, we have to talk about your will or finances or take certain decisions, maybe start with values. You might say something like, I'm not trying to rush anything. I just want to understand what matters most to you so I don't have to guess later. That kind of shifts the tone from confrontation to care. The second thing, timing matters too. These conversations rarely work in the middle of a crisis or at the end of a long emotional day. Look for a quieter moment, a walk, a drive, a shared meal when no one feels cornered. Three, this is also something to remember. One conversation is almost never enough. If your family has avoided these topics for years, it's unrealistic to expect that openness overnight. Have patience with it. You're not trying to create conflict, you're trying to prevent chaos. And remember, even if the conversation doesn't go the way you hope, planting the seed still matters. This next question speaks to something we addressed in a recent episode on Aging with Dignity: how to be the advocate for a loved one without being perceived as quote unquote difficult. Versha, every time I speak up in a medical or care setting, I worry I'm being labeled that family member. I want to advocate without burning bridges. Is that even possible? So I'm assuming you're not intentionally being confrontational, that you're asking questions because you're trying to protect someone you love and still be respected in the room. Here's what I want you to know: advocacy and aggression are not the same thing. You don't have to raise your voice to be taken seriously, and you don't have to apologize for asking reasonable questions. What often helps is grounding your advocacy in curiosity rather than confrontation. Simple phrases can go a long way, like, help me understand, or what happens if this doesn't work, or what should we be watching out for at home? Those questions invite collaboration instead of defensiveness. They acknowledge the expertise of the professional you're speaking with, and it opens up discussion around what you can do as an advocate for your parent, grandparent, or spouse. It also helps to remember this: the healthcare systems are busy and they move fast. When someone slows things down, even with these thoughtful questions, it can feel disruptive. But you're allowed to take up that space. And if you ever feel dismissed, it's okay to gently persist. You might say, I just want to make sure I understand. Could you walk me through that again? Share that your loved one is maybe often confused or you're consulting with different specialists, so you've become the one to keep proper tabs on your loved one's care regimes. You're the one who notices changes, the person who remembers the details, and the person who'll be there long after the appointment ends. So, this knowledge better arms you at home. You're not fighting the system. Your advocacy means staying present inside it, calmly and consistently. You can do this. The next question comes from a caregiver who feels stuck in the middle. My parent clearly needs more help, but not urgently enough for anything to move quickly. We're stuck waiting, reassessing, filling gaps ourselves. What am I supposed to do in this in between space? So I feel this question comes from one of the hardest places in caregiving, the waiting. You're not in crises. You're not in a place of stability. You're just in between. That limbo can be exhausting because there's really no clear action plan, just constant vigilance. And here's the truth: the in between space is where most of the caregiving actually happens. What helps is shifting your focus from waiting for the system to stabilizing the present. Maybe ask yourself, what's the one thing that could make today safer or easier? Or what's the biggest stress point right now? Meals, medications, mobility, loneliness? You don't have to fix everything at once. There's no perfect plan here. You're building a patchwork. And by the way, document everything. Keep notes on changes, falls, missed medication, increased confusion, because these patterns matter. When reassessments appear, those details carry weight. Use the time to learn the landscape. Think of it as a quiet preparation. The in between space can make you feel somewhat powerless, but you're not passive. You're holding things together while the rest catches up. And when the next door opens, because eventually one does, you'll be ready. This next question is from a caregiver operating from a distance. Versha, I don't live close to my parents, so I feel like I'm always on alert. Phone calls, coordinating care, worrying something will happen when I'm not there. This feels like a full time job. How do I find a balance with wanting to be there for them, but also wanting to live my life, my work, my children, my social life, my travel, etc.? Years ago, when I was still in England, I have to admit this was often on my mind. Mom and dad were younger, but older. We had no idea the path forward, what it would look like, how long it would run, and that itself is what gave rise to concern. When you don't live close by, that caregiving doesn't happen in the loved one's presence, in their homes, in their doctor's appointments. Instead, it lives in your nervous system. I find out I was always half listening, always bracing for the call you hope wouldn't come. I was lucky in that I moved back to Montreal well before they actually needed support. But I've seen how this kind of caregiving can quietly take over everything: your work focus, your parenting, even your ability to enjoy a dinner or a trip without guilt tagging along. Distance caregiving, no matter if you're in the next province or halfway around the world, this can feel like a full time job because mentally it is. If you're not already doing this, you might consider a quiet, structured approach to bring you peace and quiet vigilance at the same time. You might try scheduled check ins instead of that open ended anytime call. You might find one shared contact person locally, a neighbor, friend, or a professional, so everything doesn't only funnel through you. And set clear boundaries for yourself around when you're on and when you're allowed to be off. I'd also like to say it's important to name the grief that comes with this role. You're actually grieving the fact that you can't be in two places at once, that your life has grown in one direction, which it should and was meant to, while your parents' needs pull you back another. You may not be physically present, but mentally you're always on call. That tension doesn't mean you're failing anyone. Your work, your children, your friendships, your travel, those aren't distractions from caregiving. They're what keep you whole enough to keep caring. And you're not choosing between them and you, by the way. You're learning how to hold both. This question is from a listener in Vancouver. My mother has dementia. Every specialist has a different opinion. Every service has a different process. And somehow I'm the one connecting all the dots. I'm exhausted. Is this what caregiving is supposed to feel like? Well, your exhaustion is very clear. The journey with dementia care unfortunately feels very much like navigating a maze. Different specialists, different recommendations, different forms to complete, and somehow you're expected to be the one who holds the whole picture together. There are huge gaps in the system, and it's not presently designed to help us navigate this path. I've watched caregivers become accidental case managers, tracking appointments, translating medical language, filling in the gaps between services that don't talk to each other. I found myself doing this for both mom and dad simultaneously. That kind of responsibility is mentally and emotionally draining in ways people don't always see. So, yes, the exhaustion is a very common part of this. But I also want to share something out loud. Caregiving is not supposed to feel this overwhelming all the time. When it does, it's often a sign that too much is sitting on one person's shoulders. If there's no chance of having someone else share the responsibilities, adult children, siblings, other family members, then perhaps narrowing your focus can help. You don't need to solve dementia in this particular case, but you need to manage today and specifically for your loved one. So perhaps start by asking yourself, like what decisions actually need to be made now, or which opinions are useful, which ones are just noise, or where can I ask for help coordinating, not just advising. Sometimes the most helpful support isn't another specialist. It's someone who can help you connect the dots so you're not doing it alone. Seek out that support you can use. Okay, this question comes from an adult child who's trying to look ahead. Versha, caring for my father has made me realize how unprepared I am. I'm in my late 50s. My children are all grown up. As I work through my father's issues and plans, I find myself thinking, if something happened to me, my family wouldn't know what to do. Is this a normal part of caregiving? And what do I do about it? That moment of awakening. I think caring for someone else has a way of turning the mirror back on us ourselves, probably because we least expect it. You start noticing how many decisions you're making on someone else's behalf, how much guesswork is involved, and suddenly you realize if this were me, my family would be scrambling. This realization can be very unsettling, even a bit scary. It's very normal. I've had to consider many aspects of my end of life basically by taking decisions for mom and dad. It was not easy, and I'm not done. So, what I'm learning is you don't have to fix everything at once. Start small. Ask yourself, who could speak for me if I couldn't? Does anyone know where to find my information? Having have I said out loud what matters to me most? This isn't just about the paperwork, by the way. Of course that's important, but it's also about the kindness towards the people that you love and who will be behind trying to pick up the pieces when you're having trouble. Making your wishes known to help guide others act on your behalf later. Making concrete plans that don't put the onus of the big decisions on the caring or grieving loved ones. This is being responsible. And it comes from love, not fear. Okay, this last question brings us an interesting perspective. So, for sure, we're a multi generational family grandparents, parents, kids, all under one roof with my siblings and their families not too far. Some in the family are really stepping up, others are in denial. And I know kids are quietly absorbing it all. I worry about what my children are missing the school plays, soccer games, even those everyday moments, all because caregiving has taken over. How can I hold my family together when everyone is coping so differently? Hmm. So I haven't lived this one, but I've been close to it and I've learned from my friends on from their perspective. Multi-generational caregiving doesn't just stretch schedules, it feels like it stretches the identities too. Everyone is living the same reality, but experiencing it very differently. Some people step forward because action helps them cope. Some people go quiet because denial feels safer. These are the adults. The children, of course, are watching and learning even when no one thinks they're watching. Your worry about what your kids are missing tells me something important. You're constantly triaging whose needs come first. And of course, that has to be exhausting. Caretaking can quietly steal time, energy, and shared moments, and pretending otherwise only deepens the strain. Holding a family together doesn't mean making everyone cope the same way. It means making room for the differences without letting the resentment quietly take over. You might want to broker an honest conversation with those who have the emotional capability and desire to come to the table. Focus on the children helps to bring perspective to why you're coming together and not to create a blame culture. Going forward, being present with your children may look different than before, but that's also honest and a great teaching opportunity for them. Also, holding a family together sometimes means loosening the idea of how it should look and focusing instead on staying connected, even imperfectly. This too is a form of care. Well, that's it for this episode. I thank you all for sending your comments and your questions in. If you've heard yourself in any of these voices, know that you're not alone. These questions didn't come from textbooks, they came from real lives. I want to hear yours, your questions, your stories, your unfinished thoughts. But before I let you go, I also want to share one small update. After this episode, we're going to take a short pause, not because the conversation's ending, but because a new season's beginning. We're stepping back briefly to gather new stories, new voices, new perspectives for aging with dignity. Whether you're an older adult thinking about your own future, an adult child trying to support a parent, or someone quietly carrying both roles at once, your stories are shaping where this podcast is going. We're using this break to listen more closely, to prepare new conversations, and to make space for the voices that we haven't been heard from yet. This work deserves time and care, just like the people we talk about here. So think of this as a breath, not a goodbye. We'll be back soon with more conversations that meet you right where you are. A gentle reminder to please share this podcast series with your friends, family, or anyone you care about. And please don't forget to hit like and subscribe to the podcast if you're enjoying what you hear. Thank you for listening. Thank you for caring. And thank you for sharing. Until next time, reminding us all to age gracefully and live vibrantly. Everything you've heard today, just real talk. It's just our personal stories, experiences, and honest opinions. This podcast isn't providing legal, medical, financial, or therapeutic advice. And no, listening doesn't make me or my guests your lawyer, doctor, financial advisor, or therapist. The guests and I are here to share stories, spark ideas, and hopefully give you something to think about. When it comes to the big decisions, make sure you do your homework or check in with the experts who know your situation best. We're here to keep the conversation going. You're the one in the driver's seat.